First episode, titled The Hidden Hand, kicks off with a flashback sequence going back 100 years to the final battle of the Butlerian Jihad, marking the end of humanity's war against the thinking machines. Valya Harkonnen explains in voiceover that history claims it was an Atreides who led humanity to victory, while House Harkonnen were branded as cowards and banished to a desolate world as punishment. However, according to Valya, these records are based on lies, so she has set out to change them. Decades later, a young Valya joins the Sisterhood with her sister Tula on Wallach 9. The order has been created by the first Mother Superior, Rakella Berto Anirul, whom Valya considers her true mother, and who trains women to act as truthsayers to the great houses, helping them discern truth from lies and forming a network of influence across the Imperium, through which the Sisterhood could govern the future. Thanks to her Harkonnen blood, however, Valya is an outcast. But that changes when, on her deathbed, Mother Rakella asks to see her, warning of the coming of Tiran Arafel, a reckoning for the whole galaxy. They share a vision of a sandworm swallowing the Sisterhood headquarters in a desert, amidst Rakella's screams of red dust. The vision ends with a pair of mechanical blue eyes saying something unintelligible. Rakella then pulls Valya closer and tells her that she will be the one to see the burning truth and know. Rakella's death causes a brief schism in the Sisterhood, with Reverend Mother Dorothea refusing to bow to Valya and threatening to destroy the genetic matrix they use to record the genes of all the great houses. Valya stops her by using the voice, a new technique she has developed, and orders Dorothea to kill herself. 30 years later, Valya is now Mother Superior of the Sisterhood, and Tula is her most trusted advisor, teaching classes on brain anatomy with a focus on lying, martial arts, and truth-saying. The Sisterhood is thriving, with young girls from all over the galaxy having joined to become truth-sayers and preparing to welcome among their ranks Princess Inez Carino, the heir to the Golden Lion throne. She is to spend 10 years training with the Sisterhood, and the anticipation of her arrival disrupts the other students' daily lives. Meanwhile, Valya carries on with the Order's affairs, assigning truthsayers to 2 houses while denying House Harkonnen, whose blood she carries, a 4th time. Over the decades, Valya has kept a careful eye on how the great houses behave thanks to her truthsayers. She has also devised a secret breeding program, instructing the truthsayers to influence the houses to marry according to it. Right now, her eye is on House Carino, who rules the Imperium. Inez is set to soon marry 9-year-old Pruett Richus, thus keeping the Carino line stable for centuries. Before that, however, Inez has 10 years until Pruett comes of age and will become part of the Sisterhood to ensure that Valya's plan of having a sister on the throne happens. To influence Emperor Javico Carino and Princess Inez, Valya has placed truthsayer Kasha by their side. In Prophecy, Seleucia Secundus isn't yet the caustic and rainy planet it is by the time of the movies. Instead, it's House Carino's seat of power, with Emperor Javico facing a dilemma. The Imperium hasn't been able to pacify the Fremen in Arrakis in order to stabilize the spice supply and needs to form an alliance to strengthen its forces. The solution presents itself in the form of House Richesse, an ambitious and powerful house that wants to marry its heir, young Pruett, to Princess Inez. Empress Natalia disapproves of the wedding, but Javico doesn't see another way to solve his problems and agrees to it. Before the celebrations take place, however, a stranger arrives. Desmond Hart was once a soldier fighting for the Imperium on Arrakis and mysteriously survived an attack that killed his whole regiment. He arrives at the palace and Javico welcomes him as a respected veteran, even inviting him to attend the engagement party. Desmond tells him the attack he survived wasn't carried out by Fremen, but by rebel insurgents from the other houses. This surprises even Javico's truthsayer, Kasha, who confirms that Hart believes the story he is telling and that it must have been an isolated incident. Inez is a smart young woman who understands that marrying young Pruett Richez will give her 10 years to train as a truthsayer in the Sisterhood, allowing her to effectively control her husband when he comes of age and rule the Imperium without interference. When they first meet at their engagement ceremony, however, Pruett proves to be rather stubborn and not easily impressed, which surprises Inez. In secret, she also has a relationship with her swordmaster, Bene Gesserit. After Hart's arrival, however, everything changes. Kasha has a strange vision of Inez wearing her red wedding dress and in danger as a sandworm swallows them both, and Inez keeps saying that Kasha did this. Again, the vision ends with a pair of mechanical blue eyes saying something unintelligible. Distraught, Kasha decides to visit the Sisterhood on Wallach 9 to try and beg Valya not to go through with Inez's wedding to Paul Atreides. She is welcomed by Valya and Tula, but Valya vehemently refuses to call off the royal wedding and suggests Kasha to stay the night with the Sisterhood on Wallach 9 to remind her of her purpose. Tula then begs Valya to make sure that Inez really is the one the Sisterhood should be betting on. The royal engagement happens as planned in Salusa Secundus, but there is an incident during the reception. Pruett accidentally releases his robot pet. Since the Butlerian Jihad, every robot or thinking machine has been banned, and Empress Natalia sees this as a reason to call off the wedding. However, Javico minimizes the incident, letting Pruett off the hook without even a slap on the wrist. Frustrated, Inez lashes out at Pruett and after the party, goes to a club in the Division neighborhood with her half-brother, Constantine, who has no claim to the throne. There, she meets and spends the night with Bene Gesserit after they both partake of spice. Back at the palace, Javico talks with Desmond Hart and confesses that he feels that marrying Inez to House Harkonnen is wrong. Hart tells him that it should help the Imperium pacify Arrakis, but that there is a larger insurgency going on. According to him, people wonder if the ban on thinking machines was the correct decision, and why only the great houses profit from spice. Hart also expresses disdain for the Sisterhood and tells Javico that there is something else at play. He should have died in the attack on his division on Arrakis, but was reborn without fear. Javico, who isn't a believer, says he'll believe in anything that frees him from Inez's wedding. Later, he finds a recording of the attack on Arrakis, showing Hart's whole division killed and him kneeling down as a sandworm appears to swallow him. That night, Hart meets young Pruett, who can't sleep because of a bad dream. Hart tells the boy about a war that's hidden in plain sight, fought by an enemy who has made themselves indispensable and does the thinking for everyone. He also says he's been given great power and says that Pruett's sacrifice won't be in vain. Immediately after, the boy starts burning from the inside, painfully killing him and leaving his body completely charred. On Wallach 9, the same thing happens to Kasha, who dies screaming as Valya and the other sisters watch helplessly. Finally, Valya whispers, "I see, Mother, I see." Is this the burning truth she was supposed to see? Second episode, titled Two Wolves, opens as Kasha's unexpected death is the talk of the Mother School. The acolytes are particularly shaken, and Reverend Mother Tula Harkonnen learns at the autopsy that what killed Kasha was an acute imbalance in her body, but its source is still a mystery. To try and course-correct everything, Valya decides to go to Salusa Secundus, leaving Tula in charge of the school and with a grudging mission. She is to convince young sister Lila, the great-great-granddaughter of Mother Superior Raquella Berto Anaral, to go through the agony, a painful and possibly deadly ritual that activates her genetic memory and allows her to talk to Raquella, to understand whether this is the burning truth she spoke of before dying. Lila is dutiful and obedient, understanding why the Sisterhood kept her heritage secret from her, but still wary of the ritual. She confers with her fellow acolytes, with Sister Jen arguing that the Sisterhood doesn't care about her, and Sister Emmeline, who comes from a line of martyrs from the Machine War, saying that sacrificing her life for a greater purpose is an honor. Tula, who has a special relationship with Lila, informs the younger woman that her mother died in childbirth and that Lila may be able to speak with her as well during the agony. Ultimately, though, it's Lila's choice to accept or refuse. The ritual itself is different from the agony that Paul Atreides goes through in Dune. Part 2. Spice isn't yet available to the Sisterhood, so they use another component, the Rossack poison. Tula drops it on Lila's eyes and guides the girl through the steps, telling her to follow Tula's voice and focus on who she needs to see. Otherwise, the dead won't let her come back. The scene itself feels like a horror movie. Among darkness and lighting in a ruined palace, Lila must face a horde of her dead ancestors until she finds Raquella. Tula attempts to speak to Raquella, who says, "The key to the reckoning is one born twice. Once in blood, once in spice." a revenant full of scars, a weapon born of war on a path too short. Eager to see her mother, Lila doesn't leave and is possessed by the genetic memory of another person, Mother Dorothea, who young Valya killed decades earlier. As it turns out, Lila is also Dorothea's granddaughter. Furious, Dorothea recognizes Tula as Valya's sister. She tells Lila that her mother isn't there, and that the Harkonnen sisters lied to her. Finally, Dorothea taunts Tula, saying they stole her future, so she would steal their hope. Lila then falls dead, to the horror of Tula and the acolytes who are watching. Paul Atreides' death is also making waves in the Imperium capital of Silissa Secundus. Duke Ferdinand Atreides is furious at the claims that Pruitt's toy robot could have been what killed him, suspecting that his son's death was the work of the royal house to destabilize House Atreides and claim his fleet. Meanwhile, Emperor Javico speaks with Desmond Hart, who confesses to having killed Pruitt in apparent accordance with the Emperor's wishes. Javico denies ever giving such an order, to which Hart replies that he did what he did for Javico, and that he can do it again. Conflicted, Javico arrests Hart and has him thrown into one of the palace's suspension cells. Talking to Empress Natalia later, Javico tells her that Hart survived an attack by a sandworm on Arrakis, whom she then calls Shai-Hulud, revealing that she believes in the sacredness of the gigantic beings. Natalia then convinces Javico not to execute Hart, since he can still help them. Unfortunately, Javico's bastard son, Constantine, has carelessly told his lover, Duke Atreides' daughter Lady Shannon, that Pruitt was actually killed by Hart. The heated audience between Carinos and Richeses is interrupted by Valya's arrival at court. The Mother Superior didn't tell the royal house that she was on her way, seeking to purposely discover how things really are at the palace. She quickly disarms both Duke Ferdinand and Emperor Javico in conversation, and understands that Javico is lying when he says there is no one in custody suspected of Pruitt's murder. Once Duke Atreides leaves, Valya tells Javico and Natalia that Kasha died exactly like Pruitt, but half a galaxy away, and demands to interrogate Desmond Hart. The interrogation goes terribly. Hart confesses to murdering both Pruitt and Kasha, but also claims that Shai-Hulud has given him an eye that can see what ordinary people cannot, including a trail of blood behind Valya's every step. With Javico and Natalia watching and openly participating in the interrogation, Valya points out that Hart does believe what he's saying, but that he is still lying. Hart retorts, claiming that the Sisterhood's intentions are to manipulate the Imperium, and that what he did was simply dealing justice. Clearly swayed by what Hart said, Javico says that he has much to consider and ends the interrogation, despite Valya's protests and reminding the Emperor that Hart has confessed to murder and treason. Under the nobles' noses, the Emperor's sword master, Paul Atreides, has built a complete layout of the royal palace. As it turns out, he is part of the rebellion that attacked Desmond Hart's regiment on Arrakis, and they are now organizing a revolt on Silissa Secundus. The plan isn't clear yet, but it involves infiltrating the palace. Kieran gives the layout to Horus, who leads the cell, and the Fremen spy Michaela, and learns that the time to act fast approaches, with a final piece remaining. Later, we learn that Michaela is also a member of the Sisterhood when she secretly meets with Valya, who is aware of the attack on Hart's regiment on Arrakis. However, with House Carino slipping out of the Sisterhood's grasp in favor of Hart, Valya considers it may be time to sacrifice this cell in order to regain their trust. Michaela resists at first, but then tells Valya to give Kieran to the Emperor. Valya, who has a perpetual grudge against House Atreides, is immediately interested. In the dead of night, Empress Natalia releases Desmond Hart from the suspension cells. She asks him if he is a prophet, and he answers that he doesn't know. He would have laughed at that in the past, but now there are beautiful, terrible things that he can do after being swallowed by Shai-Hulud. Natalia then says that Duke Atreides has decided to recall his fleet and seize Arrakis, so she and the Emperor have decided to give him to the Duke. In the following audience, Hart burns the Duke in the exact same way he did to Pruitt and Kasha, only stopping at the Emperor's command. When Valya returns to the royal palace following her meeting with Sister Michaela, she is surprised to meet Desmond Hart in Emperor Javico's office. She was going to tell the Emperor about the rebellion, but Hart informs her that her services are no longer required, and that her privileges have been revoked. He once again claims that he wants what is best for the Imperium, which means wiping out the Sisterhood. Instinctively, Valya uses the voice to tell Hart to cut his own throat, but he is surprisingly able to resist it. Hart ends the meeting saying that now, he understands that Valya's greatest fear isn't that no one will hear her, but that they will hear her and just not care. The previous episode has already teased that Desmond Hart is more than he lets on. And now, Two Wolves makes him the most interesting addition to Dune lore in recent years. The character is an original creation for Dune Prophecy, and what's enticing about him, beyond Travis Fimmel's deranged acting, is that Hart has actually managed to make an extraordinary character like Valya Harkonnen feel out of her element. As he tells Empress Natalia, he is able to do great, terrible things. And there is a hint that this power comes from the spice he was probably exposed to when he was swallowed by Shai-Hulud on Arrakis. Still, even Paul Atreides has never been able to do the things Hart does. Mother Raquella's line while possessing Lila's body also seems to imply that Hart is the key to the reckoning that's approaching. But how, exactly, remains to be seen. Third episode, titled Sisterhood Above All, begins with Valya and Sister Theodosia leave the Imperial Palace with a mix of anger and frustration, after being casually dismissed from court by Desmond Hart in Episode 2. The next day, they meet the other sisters in the harbor, and Valya instructs them to go back to their assigned noble houses and do anything not to lose their hold over those, and that she will regain control over House Carino herself. During this meeting, Sister Michaela appears with news from Wallach Ninth. Sister Leela didn't survive the agony, but was able to reach Mother Superior Raquella, who left a mysterious hint. The key to the reckoning is one born twice, once in blood, once in spice. Valya immediately understands that Raquella is talking about Hart and says that a trip home is called for. We're taken to the frigid planet of Lankavale, the homeworld of House Harkonnen, an unspecified number of years in the past. Young Valya returns home from buying groceries and only hears complaints from her parents, Sonia and Virgil, but finds support from her siblings, Griffin and young Tula. Uncle Evgeny mentions that Valya Atreides is mysteriously back, and Valya sees this as an opportunity to get him to take back the lies he told the Landsraad about House Harkonnen so they may regain their status. She says that Virgil's grandfather, Abulurd Harkonnen, was a hero who prevented a genocide, not a coward. The adults tell her to stop being greedy, and Valya storms off with Griffin following her. They reminisce about a time when Griffin fell into a lake of icy water, and Valya rushed to rescue him. He says that he had already given up, but when she screamed for him to swim, his body mysteriously acted on its own and swam, thus saving him from death, her first ever use of the voice. He agrees to track down Valya Atreides because he believes in Valya, but in the very next scene, set some time afterward, his body is returned to Lankavale, killed by Valya. Valya vows revenge against the Atreides, despite her parents sending her to join the Sisterhood on Wallach 9, and tells Tula to find a way out of Lankavale. On Wallach 9, Valya's feud with Sister Dorothea begins when she questions how to use truth and lies when serving a noble house. Dorothea says that it's a sister's responsibility to pull them to humanity's better nature, but Valya sees truth as a tool that should be used to serve a purpose. Dorothea then taunts Valya in front of her class, and in the next scene, takes the acolytes to a test, meditating while standing in the pouring rain until they are able to forsake their family bonds and embrace sisterhood above all. After a whole day, Valya is the only one left and is once again provoked by Dorothea, who says she will always be a Harkonnen. Valya continues to meditate, though, until Mother Raquella shows up. She uses the voice to tell the Mother Superior to stop, and, later, back inside, they discuss this ability. And Raquella tells her that the Sisterhood is about advancing the human species. Sometime later, the Mother Superior shows Valya all the Sisterhood's secrets and takes her to the tunnels to see her life's great work, the genetic matrix containing the DNAs of all the great houses. To build this index, Raquella had to rely on computers, something strictly forbidden, and Valya complies with keeping this secret. Meanwhile, Dorothea, who is a Butlerian, a zealot against computers and technology, preaches that thou shalt not make a machine in the likeness of a human mind, just outside the tunnels, and stares at Raquella and Valya in jealousy. Later, Valya tells her friends that she knows Raquella will choose her as successor, and shows them the voice. In the next scene, Raquella calls both Valya and Dorothea to go through the agony together, saying they are both the strongest sisters and are both the future leaders of the Order. In Two Wolves, we learn that Raquella is actually Dorothea's grandmother, so they also share a forbidden family tie. Just as Raquella is about to drop the Rosak poison on Valya's eye, Valya stands up, apologizes, and says she can't go through with it. Later, Raquella tells Valya that a coded message from Tula arrived from Lankavale and that Valya should go. She also gives Valya a vial of the Rosak poison, telling her she should return as a Reverend Mother, or not at all. After Griffin's funeral, the following flashback sees young Tula being welcomed by her boyfriend Ori's family, camping on a forest world, preparing to hunt a Salusan bull. They know her as Tula Vale, but she changes the subject whenever someone asks her about her family. Ori's family is nice to her, and she is equally warm to all of them. When a horse falls wounded, Tula tries to save it, but Ori's uncle Shander tells her it must be put down. We do what we must. So she helps them sacrifice it painlessly. At night, Ori asks Tula about her family, and she says that after her brother died, her sister was angry and went to school, and her parents barely saw her in their grief. Ori then proposes to Tula, and as they spend the night together, the men of the family gather by the fire outside and scream their family name, Atreides. In the morning, Tula tries to sneak out of her and Ori's hut, but Ori wakes up. Feeling guilty, she confesses to Ori that her last name isn't Vale, but Harkonnen. Ori is surprised, but argues that their families chose to hate each other over something that happened more than a century ago, and that, together, they can write a future for themselves. Tula rejects him, saying it will still be an Atreides who killed her brother, and echoing what she heard that day, tells Ori that we do what we must. He then realizes the camp is eerily quiet and finds all his relatives dead outside. Tula then tells him that he didn't see her either, and kills him. Young Albert is the only one Tula allows to survive, and runs away. As she mourns Ori, whom she did love, a Salusan bull stares from afar. On Lankavale, Valya and Tula reunite at Griffin's tomb. Valya tells Tula she didn't think Tula could kill the Atreides like that, and that Griffin would be proud, but Tula isn't so sure. Back at home, Sonia, Virgil, and Evgeny all blame Valya for the massacre, saying she didn't think about the consequences the family would have to face. Angry, Valya uses the voice on her mother and almost tells her to kill herself. Before she can do anything with more tragic consequences, Valya storms off, with Evgeny calling her a sorceress. At the spot where she said goodbye to Griffin at the beginning of the episode, Valya takes the Rosak poison and emerges as a Reverend Mother as Tula finds her in agony. Tula decides to join the Sisterhood, and Valya promises a fresh start for both of them, with a new purpose. Between the flashbacks, Tula faces a challenge in the present. On Wallach 9, she is keeping Sister Leela in a vegetative state, not fully capable of letting her go yet. Sister Avila, who appears as one of Dorothea's followers in the flashbacks, brings Tula some spiced tea, but Tula forbids her from turning off Lila's life support. Tula sees the spice in her tea and has an idea. Later, Tula summons the acolytes to say goodbye to Leela, and when Sister Jen lashes out at Tula for killing Lila, Avila intervenes, saying Lila's sacrifice should be honored because she knew the risks, and that Tula and Valya would never have asked her to do it if it weren't necessary. Later, Avila again commends Tula for letting Leela go, saying that Valya would be proud. Tula then says she is going to the storeroom, but goes into the tunnels that Mother Raquella shows young Valya in one of the flashbacks. Inside, a chamber lights up in electronic blue, and we see Sister Leela inside a small glass bed. Tula activates an artificial intelligence, which is strictly forbidden, named Enerul, and orders it to flood Leela's glass bed with spice, saying that, if it uses the correct dosage, the spice could rejuvenate Leela's mind. The thinking machine objects, saying that Valya wouldn't approve, but Tula overrides this by saying she is the one in charge, and Anirul finally complies. At the end of the episode, Valya and Theodosia arrive at a luxurious apartment in Salusa Secundus. Once Valya centers herself by chanting Sisterhood above all, they are greeted by Baron Harrow Harkonnen, who calls her Aunt Valya and asks about Aunt Tula. At the fireplace, Valya's elderly uncle Evgeny Harkonnen says he thought he'd never see the day. Fourth episode, titled Twice Born, begins with the sound of a thumper. Sister Emmeline jumps awake and sees a ghost wandering the halls of Wallach 9. When she finally catches up to it, the ghost is revealed to be herself with eyelids sewn shut and cuts its own throat. It's all a nightmare that apparently the other acolytes are also experiencing, except for Sister Jen, who has to run to stop Emmeline from killing herself. In the acolyte's nightmare, a thumper awakens Shai Hulud, who swallows them into a darkness where only a pair of cold blue eyes can be seen and a robotic voice can be heard. Terrified, the acolytes tell Reverend Mother Tula Harkonnen about what happened. While Sister Avila thinks they should simply return to their studies, Tula expresses concern and calls for an experiment with the girls. They each take a spice pill to help them open their mind's eye, and then draw what they saw during their collective nightmare. First, each of them draws a different version of their own deaths. Then, in a collective trance, they all turn pages and start drawing sand dunes. Turning the page again, they all draw the mouth of a sandworm. Tula starts calling them back, but the acolytes don't even acknowledge her presence and continue drawing. Finally, they all draw the same set of two cold blue eyes in the darkness. The acolytes suddenly awaken again, and Emmeline says that God is watching and judging them, and that the reckoning is here. Emmeline later gathers with other acolytes to read about Reverend Mother Dorothea, who was a religious zealot and young Valya Harkonnen's nemesis at the Sisterhood. Later, Tula and Avila discuss the acolytes' drawings. Tula reveals that it wasn't she who woke the girls from their trance, but fear of the blue eyes they all saw. Tula recognizes that this is connected to Reverend Mother Kasha's death in Episode 1, and then determines that this isn't to be discussed with the acolytes to avoid spreading fear. Later, Tula retreats to the hidden computer room and begs Lila to wake up, because she may be the one twice born, instead of Desmond Hart. And then, she has a vision of Emmeline discovering the computers that are keeping Lila alive. When Tula snaps out of it, she sees that Lila isn't inside her tank anymore. The girl then appears sporting the iconic blue eyes of Ebad, typical of Fremen due to their constant contact with spice. On Salusa Secundus, Valya Harkonnen continues on her blast from the past journey. Having been kicked out of the Imperial Palace by Desmond Hart, she needs to find a way back into House Carino's service, and her own family may be the way. At the Harkonnen apartment, Uncle Evgeny continues to complain about everything, while Baron Harrow Harkonnen asks about the royal engagement, seeking to position the Harkonnens back in the Landsraad. That's precisely what Valya needs right now, so after denying them a truthsayer 4 times in a row, she decides to take the role herself to help Harrow. On the wall, a picture of her brother, Griffin, watches over them. For the first time ever, we see the Landsraad gathering and some new houses. This governing body assists the Emperor in ruling the Imperium, but all the House representatives also have interests of their own. Valya's plan consists of allowing the rebellion to conduct a terrorist attack at the final Landsraad session, in which Emperor Javico Carino is supposed to make a speech. With Harrow being part of the High Council, she will be present to save the Emperor's life and regain his trust. Valya and the Sisterhood also decide to play on the rumor that it was Desmond Hart who killed young Pruett Riches on Javico's orders, and that the Emperor pressured House Riches not to investigate the murder. This would give the Landsraad a reason to directly confront Javico. The Council would need a lesser house to carry this out, however, someone who has something to prove and would be willing to make a strong impression. In other words, Baron Harrow of House Harkonnen. Later at night, Theodosia confronts Valya and asks why she was brought along, to which Valya answers that Theodosia's talent is a last resort. At the Imperial Palace, Princess Inez joins her family for breakfast, but doesn't like sharing the table with Desmond Hart, whom she knows killed her groom, young Pruett Riches. Rumors have been making the rounds in the capital, denouncing Hart as the killer, rumors that were carelessly started by Emperor Javico's own bastard son, Constantine. Inez was set to join the Sisterhood, but learns that, in the face of recent events, her family has decided she will remain on Salusa Secundus with them instead. Later, Hart pleads to Javico to use him against those who talk behind the Emperor's back, but is denied. Somewhere else in the capital, Horus and Kieran Atreides meet with Duri, an Ixian smuggler who supplies the rebellion with explosive drones, forbidden after the Machine War, they will use in the attack on the Emperor and the Landsrod. If it succeeds, they hope their movement grows, and spice finally flows for everyone, not just the great houses. As they enjoy a night out before the attack, Princess Inez sneaks in to find Kieran. Inez wants to help in any way she can, but without hurting her father. Kieran also mentions that his father survived an atrocity. Is he the son of young Albert Atreides from Episode 3? What the rebels don't know is that they were caught by surveillance cameras trading with the Ixian, and that this footage will be delivered to Hart by Empress Natalia. She knows how inert Javiko can be, so she acts behind her husband's back to get Hart to go after the rebels. He then asks the royal guards to scour the city and arrest the rebels. Later, Inez and Constantine agree to attend the Landsrod's final session and reveal to the council the truth about Hart. When the Landsrod assembles for its final session in the Imperial throne room, everyone is ready. Harrow is ready to confront the Emperor about Pruett Richessa's death. Inez is ready to reveal the truth about Desmond Hart. Kieran and the rebels are ready for their terrorist attack on the Emperor, and Valya is ready to stop them. Harrow opens the session by saying the rules of Canley, which prevent one house from directly attacking another, were violated. Before he can make any formal accusation, though, Princess Inez interrupts the session to accuse Desmond Hart of killing Pruett Richesse. As the representatives discuss, Hart brings in the Ixian and the rebels who were planning the attack on the Landsrod, all but Kieran, who was lucky enough to have been in the palace the whole time. Hart confesses to killing Pruett, but argues that it was justified because the boy had a thinking machine, which is strictly forbidden. He makes a passionate speech about drawing a hard line against thinking machines, and once Javiko acquiesces, proceeds to burn the captured rebels and the lords who recruited Harrow the same way he burned Pruett and Kasha to death. This time, however, the act clearly weighs on his mind and gives him his own vision, a thumper summoning Shai Hulud under the scorching sun of Arrakis and being swallowed by the beast. Then, two blue eyes saying something mechanically in the darkness. As the vision fades, we see Desmond's eyes, one of them frozen in place as if it were a machine. Finally, the pain drives him to stop just short of killing everyone. But before leaving, he stares at Valya, leaving behind drops of his own blood. Back at the Harkonnen apartment, Valya tells Theodosia to send Desmond's blood to Tula, so she can analyze it through the Sisterhood's breeding index and identify who he is. Valya then confronts Evgeny about everything he has said about her and done against her. As Evgeny starts to choke and reach for his medicine, Valya takes it and keeps it out of his reach until he eventually drops dead on the ground. Griffin then appears to her and says that now he understands what it took for her to come back home, that he is also willing to make a sacrifice, and that everyone makes their own choices, and he has done his. As his face starts to glow, Valya says, "Thank you, Theo," and it's revealed that it wasn't really Griffin she was talking to, but Theodosia. As it turns out, she is a Tleilaxu face dancer, capable of taking someone's appearance and assimilating their knowledge. Fifth episode begins with a new member of the Sisterhood, Sister Francesca, arriving on Salusa Secundus. She was once Emperor Javiko Carino's concubine and is Constantine's mother. Her arrival during an official ceremony disrupts the royal family's dynamics and sees Empress Natalia's influence over her husband Wayne, because Javiko is still deeply infatuated with Francesca. As Valya later explains, Francesca used the Sisterhood art of imprinting on him, causing such a strong impression that he will always love her. She arrives unannounced during the unveiling ceremony of the Emperor's new elite regiment, claiming to have gotten a message from Constantine, and their son becomes the central issue between her and the Emperor. Constantine has always been seen as a troublesome youngster, incapable of holding responsibility, but Francesca manages to sway Javiko. Back at the Harkonnen apartment on Salusa Secundus, Valya briefs Francesca on the dire situation the Sisterhood finds itself in. She confesses that she sent the message under Constantine's name to avoid being tracked by the Spacing Guild, and tells Francesca about Mother Kasha's death and everything that happened afterward. Francesca immediately recognizes Desmond Hart as being the reckoning that Mother Superior Raquella spoke of on her deathbed. Francesca's mission, then, is to guide House Carino back to the Sisterhood, convincing Javico to allow Princess Inez to study on Wallach 9 and to make Constantine the new commander of the Imperial fleet. After the ceremony, Baron Harrow Harkonnen, distrustful of his aunt Valya's actual motives and fearful of Hart's display of power, visits Hart at the Imperial Palace to offer a formal apology for attempting to confront the Imperial House during the Landsraad meeting. Hart attempts to manipulate the Baron, revealing that his true intention is to wipe out the Sisterhood by exposing their ties with the rebellion. Harrow helps Hart by telling him about contraband of whale fur from Lankavale. His own investigation showed that contraband in the Salusan capital city of Zimia was conducted on the underground market by a gang of Arrakis smugglers, and he suggests that Hart start there. In return, Hart gives Harrow a forbidden thinking machine device to eavesdrop on Valya. Later, Hart invites Swordmaster Paul Atreides to join his regiment in searching for the rebels, but Constantine shows up for a lesson. Late, as always. Kieran lashes out at the boy, but is truly afraid of what Hart will do to his rebel friends, and ends the lesson immediately. He rushes to Zimia to alert Michaela about Hart's incoming attack. After torturing a smuggler who rats Michaela's bar as a hotbed for insurgents, Hart goes straight there and taunts her by asking why a Fremen like her is profiting from spice and the raping of Arrakis. As Hart and his regiment ravage the place, Kieran and Michaela detonate the explosives and flee. Outside, they part ways once Kieran finds out she is actually part of the Sisterhood. After Francesca convinces Javico that Constantine needs to be given more responsibility so he can prove himself, it's time to convince Constantine that he has what it takes to become the man he wants to be. They have a brief conversation in the training room, where, after he asks her what was the purpose of bringing him into the world, Francesca tells him that it's to protect his sister from harm, even if it comes from people who claim to love her, leading him to arrest Paul Atreides. At the Imperial Palace, Constantine continues to train his frustrations away when only stopping to see what Kieran has in his locker. He is surprised to find a blueprint for the palace, indicating the Swordmaster is actually a rebel, and rats him out to Hart. When Kieran returns, Constantine, Hart, and the new elite regiment are all there waiting to arrest him. Later, the Emperor announces his son as the commander of the fleet during a courtyard dinner. The sister had told Javico she didn't come to Salusa Secundus to drive a wedge between him and his wife. But the damage is done. After Constantine's nomination, Empress Natalia leaves the dinner feeling disgusted and humiliated. Also angry, Inez visits Kieran at the prison and uses what she knows of truth sense on him, only to find out that he never lied to her and worked with the rebellion for the good of the Imperium. After the courtyard dinner, at the end of the episode, Empress Natalia visits Hart in his quarters, where he recovers from the explosion. She tells him that the Sisterhood took everything from her and asks what they did to him. That's when Desmond reveals that the woman who gave birth to him was a sister who sent him to live among scavengers. When she hears that, Natalia kisses him and promises that, together, they will rid the Imperium of the Sisterhood. At the Harkonnen apartment, Harrow prepares to depart for Lankavale to attend Uncle Evgeny's funeral. He hides something in his suit, probably the device given by Hart, and meets Valya before leaving. The Baron is clearly doubtful about what Valya really wants, but is easily swayed by the promise of power. They part on good terms, as Valya gives him Evgeny's old ring, which is supposed to be worn by the head of House Harkonnen. He tells her to consider the apartment her home while he is gone, probably hoping that a listening device captures proof she can give Hart about her intentions. After the explosion of her bar in Zimia, Michaela meets Valya and Sister Theodosia at the Harkonnen apartment. She reports that Hart survived the explosion and gets angry when Valya tells her that there is a contingency for that. Michaela lost the work of a lifetime, but Valya tells her it wasn't in vain, and that it was required to keep Hart occupied while Francesca exerts her influence over the Emperor. The Mother Superior then gives Michaela access to the Sisterhood's safe house on Arrakis. But rather than leaving on good terms, Michaela warns her that she won't betray the Fremen like she betrayed the rebels. Back at the Sisterhood's headquarters on Wallach 9, Reverend Mother Tula Harkonnen recruits the help of Sister Jen, the only acolyte who didn't share in the eyes in the darkness nightmare in the previous episode. Jen has been ferociously questioning Tula about the nightmares, but Tula quenches her thirst for answers by getting her involved in caring for Sister Lila, who is still struggling to take control of her body after dying in the agony and being resurrected in a tank of spice. Tula's plan works. Jen and Lila were close, so having a friend's voice to follow proves important to Lila. When Jen explains the collective nightmare the acolytes experienced, however, Lila suddenly shivers, her body being taken over by Mother Rakella, who is one of her foremothers. Rakella knows everything about the nightmare, because it's the exact same vision she had on her deathbed. Rakella explains that it wasn't a nightmare, but prescience, a vision of the upcoming reckoning, and if he succeeds, humanity will backslide into self-destruction. She is talking about Desmond Hart, but Jen doesn't know about that. Unable to contain Rakella, Jen leads her to the laboratory to talk to Tula. The role reversal between Tula and Rakella in Lila's body is funny, as Rakella is aware of what's happening, but doesn't care about formalities. Her goal is to get answers and help the Sisterhood, so she doesn't care who sees her, while Tula is desperate to keep it a secret. Analyzing Kasha's brain samples, Rakella identifies the same enzyme used by the thinking machines during the Butlerian Jihad, when they created the Omnious Plague to try and decimate the human race. During Rakella's explanation, Sister Avila knocks on the lab's door to deliver the blood sample of Desmond Hart, and she is disgusted to see that Lila has been possessed, calling it an abomination. This is the term the Bene Gesserit used to describe what happens when someone is possessed by the genetic memory of a forebear, like what happens to Lila. It also applies to people who are pre-born, like Valya Atreides in Dune Part 2. Rakella interrupts Tula and Avila's altercation to inform them that the enzyme has been turned into a virus. Finally, once Lila is safely restrained and resting, Tula takes Desmond Hart's blood sample to Anarul, the secret Sisterhood AI, to analyze. The discovery shatters her. Desmond has both Atreides and Harkonnen blood. This all but confirms that Desmond Hart is the product of her relationship with Ori Atreides when she was young, and that young Tula was pregnant when she slaughtered the Atreides all those years ago. Sixth episode begins as the finale confirms that Tula is Desmond's mother, but she didn't abandon him. More on that later. In the opening scene, she hears voices. "You abandoned your child. He's your child. He's your blood. You should have never followed Valya." We cut to a flashback, specifically the moment Valya murdered Dorothea, as witnessed by Tula and two other acolytes. Valya convinces them to tell others that Dorothea took her own life out of grief for Mother Rakella. Sisterhood above all, and all that. Tula then confesses that she's pregnant with Ori Atreides' baby, and she wants to keep it. "Then I'll support you. We'll raise it together," Valya surprisingly vows. In a later flashback, Valya shows Tula and the other sisters the breeding index. Tula thinks it's too risky, believing a mind can't be controlled forever, artificial or not, but Valya thinks they could use it to put a sister on the throne, starting with Francesca imprinting a young Javico. Valya also tells Tula that her baby could shape worlds. Your child is destined for great things. However, in another flashback, we discover why Tula gave Desmond away. As she holds her son, she says, "My sweet boy, barely in the world and already you know so much sadness. You deserve the chance to choose your own path. Be free, not what anyone desires you to be." She sends him away with the midwife, who promises to look after him and take him far away. So they swap Desmond with a stillborn baby, so Valya thinks he died at birth. As Tula and Nazir try to get to the bottom of the Sisterhood's shared nightmares and the virus, they realize that fear is what it's feeding off of, and that it's a bioweapon under Desmond's control. As it's a physical contagion, they believe they could produce an antiviral and generate a cure, but it means one of them has to face it head-on. Nazir volunteers and triggers an active response, but as she tries to control her fear, the virus overwhelms her. "I see it, the monster of Arrakis. Eyes, I see them. They're watching him. It's not human, Nazir says, further suggesting it's a product of thinking machines. She burns to death like the others. Soon after, Tula tells the breeding index's thinking machine about the virus and what Nazir said. You're talking about a thinking machine on a nanoscale, it tells her, and if she eliminates Desmond, it could stop the attacks. He wasn't born a weapon. He was made into one. I'll go to him, she says. Desmond questions Paul Atreides over the Sisterhood's connection to the rebellion, but he stresses that he doesn't trust the Harkonnens, but he also hates Desmond and the Emperor. Basically, he doesn't give him any useful information. Later, Inez tries to free him from the suspension chamber, but she's caught red-handed by her mother. You foolish, lovesick girl, she says, and when Inez pleads for her mother's support, she has her arrested. I wanted to teach you about power, so let this be a lesson, she says. After episode 5, it's clear that Sister Francesca is the true love of Javico's life, and he was forced to marry Natalia to strengthen the Imperium. The finale picks up with them in bed together, and he offers her a place at the palace. He believes his wife would be happy to end the charade, and even offers to speak to Valya so they could be together without impunity. Soon after, Francesca reveals to Valya that both Inez and Kieran have been arrested. Valya concocts a plan. With Theodosia's help, it's confirmed she's a face dancer bred by Tulaxan geneticists. She'll rescue the princess until her coronation can be secured. And Francesca will kill the emperor with a metacyanide needle. Javico has forfeited the right to live out his reign in peace, she says. Naturally, Francesca is upset. She honestly believes Javico would ensure Francesca's safety and welcome back the alliance of the Sisterhood, but Valya isn't convinced. Javico then confronts Desmond over Inez's arrest, but he blames it on Natalia. Javico reveals plans to send Natalia on a tour of goodwill across the universe to strengthen their ties with the great houses, but Desmond sees straight through him. He knows he wants to spend more time with Francesca. The sisters are stoking rebellion, Desmond warns, but Javico's allegiance is to the Mother Superior, despite their differences over the years. Javico then finds Natalia, who's heard about her imminent departure from Salusa Secundus, and she doesn't want to go. You'll do as you're commanded, he says, but Desmond walks in to support Natalia. For your own safety, perhaps it's time to let clearer heads prevail. Going forward, my counsel won't be ignored, she warns. Valya arrives at the palace and quickly gets herself arrested for insulting the emperor. She tells him he's a weak man, you traded one puppet master for another, and that every decision you ever made, we made it for you. You were only ever an assignment. You don't matter. Meanwhile, Natalia tells Desmond that the great houses will authorize retaliation against the Sisterhood if they convince them they plotted to assassinate the High Council. His Sardaukar guards tell him that Valya has been arrested, and Desmond immediately knows that's exactly what she wanted to happen. Over in the stasis chamber, Valya kills the guards and frees Inez. She wants to take Kieran with them too. Valya thinks it's too risky, but she reluctantly agrees. Theodosia stays behind, disguised as Inez. Valya tells her that she could die, but Theodosia says it's what she was made to do. You have a fierce will, sister, Valya says. By the time Desmond arrives, Valya, Kieran, and Inez are gone, and Theodosia is nowhere to be seen. An injured guard mumbles something about the Mother Superior, but it's actually Theodosia using another disguise, and she stabs him in the stomach. He doesn't fight back, instead ordering the guards to get this monstrosity up in suspension while he pursues Valya. Javico confronts Francesca, but she urges that Valya plan to control and kill him, not her. Save you lies for someone else, he says, and asks why he shouldn't kill her. Unfortunately, the imprint will prevent him from harming her in any way. It's a strange thing when you finally realize you've never known one moment of freedom. But I can control this, he says, before stabbing himself with the knife. Francesca tries to help him, but Natalia sneaks up from behind and pricks her neck with the metacyanide needle, killing her instantly. Javico grabs onto Natalia's dress in desperate anger, but Natalia scornfully shoves him off, before feigning shock at his death. The Emperor's been killed, she screams, as Francesca lies across Javico's body. She'll be framed for his death. While Valya and Tula are off gallivanting in Salusa Secundus, a lot goes down on Wallach 9. Leela, possessed by Dorothea for the whole episode, manages to trick Jen into loosening her restraints so she can find the other faithful. When she finds Emmeline, she asks what happened to Esther Cano, Avamar, and Jessie, the Butlerian sisters, who disbanded after Dorothea's suicide, she's told. According to Lila, or Dorothea to be clear, Valya has erased any record of them in the Sisterhood. Lila revisits the place where Dorothea was murdered and tells everyone that this order was grown on blood-soaked roots. She turns a valve, emptying the water from the pond and revealing dozens of skeletons. In a flashback, we see Valya forcing the remaining sisters to decide if they want to follow her, and those who don't fall victim to the same fate as Dorothea. In other words, they take their own lives en masse, as commanded by the voice. I will not be silenced again. In the name of all who have fallen, I will return us to our righteous path, Leela says, before seemingly destroying the breeding index. Valya, Kieran, and Tula land at a fuel depot in Zimia. Valya tells them to run ahead and she'll slow Desmond and her guards down. She uses the voice to make the guards kill each other. Desmond Hart, you say you've seen my end. Show me, she asks, and Valya's resistance to his powers makes them both collapse. Part of her brain awakes in a blizzard on an icy lake, where she sees her younger self saving Griffin from drowning. This was the first time she used the voice. Ultimately, it's clear Valya feels insecure, or even guilty, about how calamitous her life has been and all of the people who've been caught in the crosshairs of her plans. Tula finds her and tells her to accept her fears, rather than trying to fight them, and she recovers from the virus. However, she finds out what happened to Desmond in her vision. He was recovered by a mysterious stranger after the Shai Hulud attack, who augmented his eyeball with nanotechnology using thinking machines. Who is it? We don't know. Valya believes he needs to die, but Tula commands her to stop using the voice and confesses that he's her son and that she lied about his death. You think I'm a monster, sister? She asks, and Tula tells her they're the same. Wolves born to feed with no care for the cost. If my son had the potential that Anirul promised, he deserved a better fate than us. Tula wants to save him, and Valya steps back, deciding to focus her efforts on the people responsible for Desmond Hart's abilities. The reckoning is still upon us, stalking us from the darkness. If the shadows is where they want to fight, then that is where I shall go, she says. Tula hugs Desmond, who embraces her before having her arrested. Elsewhere, Valya, Kieran, and Inez arrive on Arrakis. The path to our enemy begins here, Valya says.